The German Shepherd had never barked without reason, especially not like this, sharp and unmoving, at a forgotten door. Behind it was a truth so painful it had been chained shut for generations, until now. The old Beckett house sat quiet beneath the weight of overgrown trees and time. Wooden steps creaked as Officer Maya Tran walked up to the porch, her retired canine partner, Diesel, at her side. The dog, a sturdy German shepherd with a graying muzzle and a strong, silent presence, moved with slow confidence, his body still sharp despite the years of service behind him. Maya hadn't been back to the house in almost a decade, not since her mother's funeral. Her grandfather, Thomas Beckett, had lived alone ever since. Maya knocked once and let herself in, calling out gently, "Grandpa, it's me. I brought Diesel." The old man shuffled into view from the kitchen, thinner than she remembered, but still with that proud, upright stance. "Maya," he said, his voice like rustling paper. "Didn't think you'd make the drive." "I had time off," she said, hugging him lightly. "And I figured Diesel could use a change of scenery, too." Thomas looked at the dog and gave a nod. "Still got the same eyes," he muttered. "Smart ones." They talked for a while, sitting in the front room with tea that tasted faintly like the tin it came from. Diesel lay by Maya's feet, calm and watchful as always. But when she asked to look around the house, something changed. It started when Diesel climbed the stairs ahead of her. His tail flicked once, then stopped. His ears twitched. Maya followed, calling softly to him, thinking maybe he was just curious, or caught the scent of a squirrel through an open window. But when she reached the hallway upstairs, she found him standing rigid in front of an old wooden closet. "Diesel?" she asked. He didn't turn his head. Instead, he took one step closer, sniffed the air, and let out a low, rough bark. Maya blinked. He barked again. Not the playful kind, not the alert he'd give on patrol. This bark was shorter, sharper, a warning. The hallway was dim, the carpet old and faded. The closet door was nothing special, painted white, handle slightly tarnished with age. But Diesel stood frozen in front of it, his nose practically touching the frame. Then he growled. From behind her, Thomas's voice cracked. "Get him away from there." Maya turned. Her grandfather had come halfway up the stairs, gripping the banister with a white-knuckled hand. "He's just sniffing," she said carefully. "Maybe something's in there." "There's nothing," Thomas snapped, louder than she'd ever heard him. "Just coats. Old boxes." Diesel barked again, pawing once at the door. Maya stepped between the dog and the closet. "Grandpa, what's going on?" Thomas was pale now, eyes locked on the closet, like it might open itself. "Don't open it," he whispered. "Please." But Diesel wouldn't stop. He barked again, sharper now, not angry, insistent, like something on the other side was calling him. Maya's hand hovered near the knob, uncertain, and she felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Diesel stepped closer and let out one final bark that echoed through the hall, then sat down. He was done waiting. And whatever was behind that door, Maya realized, he was ready to face it. Thomas stood frozen on the stairs, one foot still hovering above the step, his eyes locked on the closet as if it had come alive. His hand shook where it gripped the banister, the tendons in his wrist pulled tight like cords ready to snap. "Maya," he said, his voice cracking, "don't open that door." Diesel barked again, louder this time. He scratched once at the wood, nails clicking hard against the paint. His tail was stiff, his body tense, but it wasn't fear that held him there, it was purpose. He was trying to say something. Maya had seen that posture before, back when Diesel was working active cases. It was the same way he had signaled buried weapons, hidden drugs, even scared kids tucked inside crawlspaces. He never barked without a reason. Maya took a slow step toward the closet, her hand hovering near the knob. Thomas gripped the railing tighter. "I mean it, don't." She turned to look at him. "What's in there?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just old junk. That door's been closed for years." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you so afraid of it?" Thomas didn't answer. He just stood there, pale and sweating, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Diesel let out a low growl. His front paw scratched again at the door, slower this time, dragging. Maya glanced down at him, then back at her grandfather. "I have to look," she said gently. "He knows something's in there." "No," Thomas whispered. "You don't." But Maya had already turned the knob. The door creaked open, slow and loud, the hinges groaning from years without use. A draft of stale air slipped past her face, thick with dust, and something else, something deeper. The closet wasn't large, just wide enough to hold a row of hanging coats, most of them yellowed with age and sagging on the hangers. A shelf ran along the top, cluttered with old board games and boxes labeled in her grandmother's handwriting. But it wasn't the coats or the shelf that caught her eye, it was what sat on the floor at the back. An old cedar trunk, deep reddish-brown, with scuffed edges and brass corners dulled by time. A heavy chain wrapped around the lid, rusted and tight, padlocked in front like it was meant to keep something in, or maybe out. Diesel stepped closer and sat again, this time without barking. He simply stared at the trunk. His ears were forward, and he didn't blink. Maya crouched down and reached for the chain, her fingers brushing the rough metal. Behind her, Thomas let out a choked sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "You don't understand," he said. "It's better if it stays closed." Maya looked over her shoulder. "What's inside?" Thomas closed his eyes, as if saying the words would hurt more than hiding them. "I don't know anymore," he whispered, "but I spent my whole life trying to forget it." Maya turned back to the trunk. She could hear her own heartbeat now, loud in her ears. Diesel didn't move. Whatever was inside, he had brought them here for a reason. The chain came loose with a groan, rust flaking into Maya's hands as she worked the bolt cutters through the brittle links. The padlock cracked open, and the trunk let out a soft creak as she lifted the lid. A wave of stale air spilled out, thick with cedar, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. Diesel sat just behind her, ears up, tail still. His eyes never left the inside of the trunk. The contents were quiet, undisturbed, folded clothes, layers of linen yellowed with time, a lace shawl so fragile it nearly disintegrated under her touch. Beneath them, wrapped in tissue, were stacks of old photographs bound by twine. Maya untied one and picked up the first photo. It was black and white, edges curling, faded by time. A girl, maybe 16 or 17, stood barefoot in a garden. Her hair was long, dark, swept over one shoulder. She wore a summer dress and smiled softly, not at the camera but at someone just out of frame. Maya flipped the photo over. A date had been written in shaky pen, August 1962. Underneath, Claire. She shuffled through the stack. Claire at a picnic, Claire holding a guitar, Claire standing between two teenage boys. One of them looked just like a young Thomas, but Maya had never heard that name before. Never seen that face on the walls of the old house or in the family albums. She turned to her grandfather, who stood like a statue in the hallway, pale and silent. "Who is she?" she asked. He didn't answer. Maya reached deeper into the trunk. Wrapped tightly in a cloth napkin was something soft and stained. She unfolded it slowly, revealing a tiny baby blanket, once pink, now smeared with what looked like old, dried blood. Her stomach turned. "Grandpa," she said again, her voice quieter this time. "What happened here?" Still no answer. At the bottom of the trunk was a small wooden box. She pried it open and found an old plastic wallet, the kind with accordion folds. Inside was an ID card. The photo was clearer than the others. Claire again, a few years older, her eyes more serious now. The name printed beside it read, Claire Evelyn Beckett. Maya blinked. Beckett, her family name. She looked back at her grandfather, whose hands were now trembling at his sides. "Claire Beckett?" she asked. "She's not in any of the family records. I've never seen her in photos. Why would her things be locked in a trunk in a closet no one opens?" Thomas swallowed hard, his eyes wet now. "Because she was erased," he said. "Because no one was supposed to remember." Diesel gave a low whine. Maya stared at the name again, her pulse steady but cold. The baby blanket, the photographs, the locked trunk, the blood. And now this ID, proof of someone who should have been part of their history but was instead buried in a box behind coats and silence. She sat back on her heels. Nothing made sense yet, but one thing was certain. Diesel hadn't led her here by accident. He had followed something deeper than scent. He had followed the weight of a hidden life. Thomas didn't speak at first. He just turned away from the closet, his shoulders shaking as he moved slowly down the hall. Maya followed, her hands still dusty from the trunk, Diesel trailing behind them. They stepped into the old sitting room, where sunlight spilled through gauzy curtains and lit the dust floating in the air like ash. Thomas sank into the nearest armchair, as if his bones could no longer hold him up. His hands covered his face, and when the first sob escaped him, it came out sharp and sudden, like something had finally snapped loose inside him. Maya had never seen her grandfather cry. Not at her mother's funeral, not when Grandma passed, not even when the cancer took his brother. He had always been the kind of man who held his feelings like bricks in a wall, silent, firm, unmoving. But now that wall was gone. "I lied," he whispered through his hands. "I lied for so long I almost believed it myself." Maya crouched beside him, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether to touch his arm or let him sit in the storm he'd built. "Claire," he said, voice breaking on the name. "She was my sister, 17 when she disappeared." He looked at Maya then, eyes red and rimmed with guilt. "We told people she ran away, said she was wild, hard to control, always dreaming of some big life in the city. But that was never true. She didn't run. She never would have left her baby." Maya's breath caught. "Baby?" He nodded slowly. "She got pregnant. Shameful thing back then. Our parents were furious, especially our father. Said she'd ruined the family name. They kept her locked in her room for months. Wouldn't even let her finish school. And when she had the baby..." He paused, trying to find the words. "She was scared, Maya. So scared. But she loved that little girl. Said she'd name her Hope." His voice cracked again, and he looked away. "One night, she came to me, told me she was going to leave. Had a plan. A friend was going to pick her up, take her to New York. She asked me to come with her. I told her no." He rubbed his face with shaking fingers, then whispered, "That was the last time I saw her." Maya felt the air in the room shift, heavy with things unsaid. "I woke up to shouting," Thomas continued. "Father was in a rage. Said she'd shamed us for the last time. Told me to forget she ever existed. When I asked where she'd gone, he said she ran off. But I found blood. On the stairs. On her blanket. And I knew." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I knew she hadn't run. But I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know." Diesel let out a low whine and rested his head on Maya's knee. "I tried to forget her," Thomas said. "I packed her things, locked them away, pretended none of it ever happened." He looked at Diesel now, his expression full of something close to awe. "But that dog, he knew. He walked in this house and went straight to her closet, straight to what I buried." Thomas leaned back, exhausted, broken. "It's like he could smell the lie I've been living with for 50 years. Maya sat in silence, heart pounding. She didn't know what to say, but she reached down and ran her fingers through Diesel's fur. Because he had known. Somehow, he had known. And now, the truth was finally beginning to breathe. The basement hadn't changed in decades. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, mildew, and time. Dust floated in the dim beam of Maya's flashlight. As she stepped carefully down the narrow stairs, Thomas behind her, one hand gripping the wall for balance. Diesel padded ahead of them, his body tense, nose low to the ground. Maya had only been down there once as a child. She remembered it as a place of shadows and cobwebs, the kind of room where you didn't breathe too loud or touch anything you weren't supposed to. Her grandfather always kept it locked. Said it was dangerous, too much junk, too many tools. But now she knew better. Diesel paused near the base of the stairs, his ears twitching, his head slowly turning toward the far end of the room. A single bare bulb hung from a wire in the middle of the ceiling, casting a weak glow over piles of boxes, broken furniture, and old paint cans. He moved with certainty, weaving between stacks of wood and dusty bins, until he stopped in front of a tall metal shelf leaning against the back wall. His tail was stiff, nose pressed to the concrete, and then he barked. Not loud, not frantic, just once, sharp and clear. Maya stepped forward and shone the flashlight where he stood. Behind the shelf, barely visible, was a section of wall that didn't match the rest. It was rougher, newer, like someone had patched it up years ago, with whatever bricks they had on hand. "Grandpa," Maya said quietly, her eyes locked on the wall. "What's behind this?" Thomas didn't answer. He stood frozen, the color draining from his face. Diesel barked again. Maya grabbed the edge of the metal shelf and pulled it away, her shoulder straining as it scraped loudly across the floor. Dust flew up in thick clouds, making her cough. Behind it, the bricked-off section stretched from floor to ceiling, uneven and poorly sealed. Thomas let out a shaky breath and lowered himself onto a stool. "I never asked," he whispered. "I never wanted to know." Maya's hand tightened around her phone. "We have to call this in." The authorities arrived within the hour. Local officers first, then a forensics team. The basement became a swarm of quiet professionals, moving with slow, careful hands. Diesel sat off to the side, silent now, but his eyes never left the wall. When they began breaking it down, the sound of metal against brick echoed like thunder in the small space. Piece by piece, the wall gave way, until finally, the first flashlight slipped into the hollow behind it. There was a moment of silence. Then someone spoke softly. "We found something." Inside the space was a shallow cavity, no bigger than a closet. And lying within it, half covered by crumbling dirt and broken plaster, were skeletal remains. A small body, fragile, curled in on itself. Beside it, still clinging to the bones, was the tattered remains of a school uniform, a faded plaid skirt, and a white blouse with pearl buttons. The fabric had rotted with age, but enough remained to see the design. Maya didn't have to be told what year it was from. She already knew. It was 1962. And Claire had never run away. She had been here, in this house, this whole time. Diesel laid down slowly and rested his head on his paws, as if something heavy had finally settled. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It had been waiting for someone to listen. The news came back 2 days later. The dental records matched. The remains in the basement belonged to Claire Evelyn Beckett. The official report used cold words like confirmed identity and homicide suspicion, but nothing could soften the truth. Claire had died in her own home. She had never left. And someone in the family had kept that secret for over 50 years. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. Diesel lay by her feet, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. The house was too quiet. It didn't feel like a place where laughter had once lived. It felt like a crime scene now, because it was. Thomas hadn't said much since the discovery. He moved through the rooms like a ghost, slower now, older than before. When Maya finally sat across from him and slid the ID card across the table, he picked it up like it might break in his hands. "I never knew she was buried down there," he whispered. "God help me. I didn't know." Maya believed him, but belief didn't fix anything. "You said she was going to leave," Maya said gently, "but someone stopped her. Who?" Thomas didn't look up. His fingers trembled as he traced the edge of Claire's photo. "There was someone else in the house that night," he said slowly. "Someone who knew about the baby. Someone who didn't want her to leave." Maya waited. "My brother," he said finally. "Andrew." She blinked. The name meant nothing to her. "You had a brother?" He nodded. 2 years younger than me. Wild as they come. Always angry. Always watching people like he didn't trust them, even when they hadn't done anything wrong. He and Claire were close when we were kids, but when she got pregnant, he trailed off. Maya's heart sank. "He hurt her." Thomas swallowed hard. "I don't know. I only know he changed. After she died, he left town. Said he couldn't stay. He packed a bag and walked out one morning. Never looked back. I didn't try to stop him. Did you ever hear from him again? Not once, Thomas said. Not a call. Not a letter. It's like he vanished. Diesel let out a low, soft huff under the table. Maya leaned back in her chair, the weight of it all pressing down on her. A hidden sister, a murdered teenager, and now a missing uncle, someone no one had spoken about in decades. She picked up the ID card and stared at Claire's young face, a girl who had never gotten the life she deserved. We need to find him, she said. If Andrew had something to do with this, he doesn't get to stay lost. Thomas didn't answer. His eyes were on the photo, but his mind was somewhere far away. Diesel stood suddenly, moving to the window. He pressed his nose to the glass, then turned back toward Maya, with that look she had come to trust more than anything else. The look that said, "You're not done yet." The agents returned the next morning, 2 men and a woman from the state task force, all calm voices and quiet questions. They sat across from Thomas in the den, where the curtains were drawn and the air smelled faintly of tobacco and mothballs. Maya stayed close, pacing the hallway just out of view, listening. She wanted to trust the process, but every part of her was on edge. Diesel, however, stayed inside the room. He lay near the fireplace at first, unmoving, eyes half closed. But as the questions deepened, where were you the night Claire disappeared? Who else lived in the house? Did you see blood? Diesel sat up. His ears twitched. His eyes shifted. Then, without warning, he let out a low growl. Maya stepped into the doorway, her gaze locking on him. He wasn't looking at Thomas. He was looking at the desk. The old mahogany desk had been in the house longer than Maya had been alive. Her grandfather always kept it neat, though mostly unused these days. But Diesel was staring straight at it now, his nose pointed low, that deep rumble still building in his chest. One of the agents turned. Is he trained to react to something like that? Maya didn't answer. She walked into the room, crossed to the desk, and ran her hand along the underside. She felt nothing at first, just smooth wood and dust. But then her fingers brushed something, a small notch near the back. She pressed it. A soft click echoed. A hidden drawer popped open just above the bottom panel. Diesel stopped growling. Maya reached in and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth, thick with age. She laid it on the table and carefully unwrapped it. Inside were letters, folded tight and bound with string, yellowed at the edges and stiff from time. Beneath them sat 2 cassette tapes, the kind no one used anymore, with peeling white labels scrawled in black ink. One simply said, "For Tom." Maya's breath caught. She looked at her grandfather. Thomas stared at the tape like it had grown teeth, his face drained of color. "That's Andrew's handwriting," he said quietly. Maya picked up the tape, her fingers trembling. She turned it over and read the rest of the message, written on the back in jagged, hurried strokes. "I did what I had to do." The agents exchanged glances. One of them reached for a portable cassette player they had brought in earlier for evidence playback. Maya handed over the tape, her eyes never leaving her grandfather's face. They slid it in and pressed play. The sound of static filled the room, then a shaky breath. A man's voice came through, rough and uneven. "If you're hearing this, then I'm either gone or too much of a coward to face what I've done. I didn't mean to hurt her. I didn't plan it. I just wanted her to listen, to stay, to stop talking about leaving." Thomas covered his mouth with his hand, a muffled sound breaking from deep in his chest. Diesel lay back down, resting his head on his paws, eyes locked on the tape deck. The voice continued. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she screamed. "I panicked. And afterward, I couldn't think. I sealed it up. Told Dad. He told me to leave. Said if I stayed, everything would fall apart. So I ran." Silence followed. Then, one last whisper. "I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to kill our sister." The tape clicked to a stop. No one moved. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, Diesel sighed deeply and closed his eyes. He had found the truth again, and this time, it spoke for itself. The room stayed silent after the first tape ended. No one moved. The agents didn't speak. Thomas sat slumped in his chair, staring at the floor like it might open and swallow him whole. Diesel remained at Maya's feet, breathing slow and steady, but alert. Maya reached for the second cassette, her hands trembling. This one was labeled only with a date, September 14, 1962, the day after Claire vanished. They slid it into the player. The tape clicked, and the static gave way to the sound of a shaky breath. Then the voice returned. It was Andrew again, but different this time. He wasn't calm. He wasn't hiding behind excuses. His voice cracked and stumbled, thick with fear and something darker. "I loved her," he said, almost a whisper. "I didn't understand it. Not the way I should have. She was my sister, I know that. But I couldn't stand seeing her with anyone else. Not with that boy from the diner. Not with the baby growing inside her. That should have been her future. Here, with us, with me." Maya looked up slowly. The air in the room turned heavy, as if the words themselves had pulled the oxygen away. Andrew's voice continued, faster now. "I went to her room that night. I told her she couldn't leave. She said I was sick. She called me disgusting. She said she'd tell everyone what I'd said to her, what I'd done. I didn't mean to hurt her, I swear. I just grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away," she screamed. "And then she fell. Hit her head on the radiator. I didn't even realize at first. She stopped moving so fast." Thomas let out a soft moan, barely holding himself together. Andrew's breathing on the tape became ragged, panicked. "I called Dad. He came right away. He saw the blood. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at me and said, 'You need to leave.' I'll handle this." I asked him what he meant. He said no one could know. He said Claire had already shamed the family once. She wasn't going to ruin it again. The room grew colder with every word. Andrew's voice dropped again. "Tom doesn't know. Not all of it. I told him she ran. I told him I had nothing to do with it. But I left the next morning because I knew if I stayed, I'd destroy what was left of this family." There was a pause, long, aching silence, before he spoke again. "I made a mistake. No, more than that. I killed her, not just with my hands, but with my obsession. I didn't protect her. I destroyed her. And Tom, I'm sorry. You deserve to know. You were always the good one. But I was your brother, and I knew you'd choose blood over justice. That's why I left. That's why I hid this. Because I knew, if I stayed, you'd forgive me. And I didn't deserve that." The tape stopped. Thomas was weeping now, quiet and broken. "He was right," he said softly. "I would have forgiven him. I already did. I was so afraid of being alone after our parents died. He was all I had left, and I let that fear blind me." Maya didn't speak. She didn't move. Diesel shifted beside her, resting his head on her foot. The truth had come out. Raw, ugly, unforgivable, but it had come out. And the dog who wouldn't stop barking had brought them to it. Maya sat on the porch steps, staring out at the wide stretch of land that had once felt like freedom. Now it felt like a cage built from secrets. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering things she couldn't quite hear. Inside, her grandfather sat in the same chair he always had, the one by the fireplace with the worn cushion. Diesel lay beside him, calm but watchful, like he still expected something to happen. She couldn't stop hearing the tape in her head, the sound of Andrew's voice, trembling and cruel, confessing to things no one had ever spoken aloud. And worse than that, the knowledge that Thomas had helped bury it. Maybe not the body, but the truth. She stood up and went back inside. The screen door creaked behind her. Thomas looked up but didn't speak. His eyes were red, his face drawn. "How could you let this happen?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but sharp. "You let everyone think she ran away. You let her baby disappear. You let a killer walk free." Thomas winced, but he didn't argue. He didn't deny any of it. "I was afraid," he said. "After our parents died, I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to believe Andrew could do something like that. So I lied to myself, and then to everyone else. Maya shook her head, the heat building behind her eyes. You let her rot under your house. I didn't know, he said again. I swear, Maya, I didn't know she was down there. I thought he took her away, maybe buried her in the woods or left her somewhere else. That's not better, she snapped. You still said nothing. You let decades go by like none of it mattered. You let me grow up thinking our family was clean, proud, respectable. You let her become a ghost. Thomas looked down at Diesel, who lifted his head and met his eyes. That dog, Thomas said, his voice cracking. He wouldn't stop. He wouldn't let me pretend anymore. Not once he barked at that closet. Not once he found that drawer. He dragged me out of my own lie. Maya crossed her arms. Then do something about it. You want to stop hiding? Good. Start by telling the police everything. All of it. Thomas didn't hesitate this time. He nodded slowly. I will. You're not doing this for me, she said. And not for her either. You're doing it because Diesel saw through you. Because even a dog knew the truth, deserved better than silence. Thomas swallowed and stood, slower now, shoulders slumped with the weight of a half-century of guilt. I'll make the call, he said. Diesel rose and walked to Maya, brushing his head against her leg. She looked down and rubbed between his ears. It wasn't over. Nothing could undo what had been done. But the truth was out. And her grandfather, who had once chosen silence, was finally choosing to speak. Not for redemption, but because Diesel wouldn't let him keep hiding. The story broke 3 days later. It started with a short article in the local paper, Missing Girl Identified After 60 Years. But by the end of the week, it was everywhere. Claire Beckett's name was on national headlines. News anchors speaking her story with solemn voices and sharp pauses. The truth that had lived in shadows now stood in full daylight, and no one could look away. Maya watched it unfold from the front porch, the television's low volume drifting out through the open screen door. Reporters had shown up at the edge of the property, vans with satellite dishes parked along the dirt road. They wanted interviews, photos, statements. Most of all, they wanted to understand how something so terrible could stay hidden for so long. The Beckett name was everywhere now, but not for the reasons her family had once been proud of. Her grandfather's face appeared in grainy photos from his youth, side by side with headlines about silence and shame. People from town, those who had once nodded at him in the grocery store, who had bought furniture from him in his younger days, were suddenly distant. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Others left angry voicemails. Maya didn't blame them. And yet, something else was happening too. Neighbors brought flowers to Claire's newly placed gravestone, a small headstone set beneath a maple tree in the town cemetery. Strangers lit candles. Notes were left at the edge of the driveway, simple things written in careful hands. She deserved better. I remember Claire from school. She was kind. I hope she's at peace now. Maya walked through town one morning and saw posters in shop windows, photos of Claire from the old trunk, printed in soft tones, with the words, "Never Forgotten," written beneath them. And everywhere Maya went, people asked the same thing. Is that the dog who found her? Diesel had become something of a legend. His photo had run in every major article. People called him the dog who wouldn't stop barking, the one who dug through silence and found the truth. Kids in town wanted to pet him. Reporters tried to film him. But Diesel didn't care. He stayed close to Maya, calm and quiet, as if none of it mattered to him. Maybe it didn't. Maybe he'd just followed the scent of something lost. And once it was found, that was enough. Still, the sheriff's department held a small ceremony at the courthouse. Nothing big, no medals. Just a plaque, a framed photo of Diesel beside the closet that started it all, and a few words from the sheriff himself. Sometimes, he said, justice doesn't come from courtrooms. Sometimes it comes from persistence, from instinct, from a dog who wouldn't give up on the truth. Maya stood at the back of the room, Diesel sitting by her side, his head high and still. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, one hand resting gently on Diesel's back, and felt the town shift around her, not just in anger, not just in shame, but in understanding. It had taken 60 years. But Claire was no longer a secret. And all because one dog had listened to something no one else had. The morning of the funeral was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you stop and breathe slower. A soft wind stirred the leaves across the town cemetery, the branches swaying gently overhead like they were whispering secrets only they remembered. Rows of folding chairs had been set up under the wide maple tree near the far edge of the grounds, just beneath the hill where the morning sun touched first. Claire's casket rested at the front, simple and white, with a spray of pale lilies resting on top. A photo sat beside it, black and white, edges frayed, a young girl standing in a field, smiling with her hair swept back by the wind. It was the same picture Maya had found in the trunk, the same one she hadn't been able to stop looking at, the one that showed Claire not as a victim, but as someone who had once been loved, once been whole. The entire town came. Old neighbors, classmates who were now gray-haired and slow-moving, people who remembered her laugh or the way she used to hum when she walked to school. Some brought flowers. Others brought nothing but quiet respect. A few stood in the back, hands folded, not knowing what to say. And that was okay. This wasn't a day for words. It was a day to remember. Maya stood near the casket with Diesel beside her. He hadn't moved since they arrived. His leash lay slack between them, his ears relaxed, but his body was still and alert. As if he knew this moment mattered. As if he felt the weight of it. When the time came to speak, Maya stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, but she didn't stop. She looked out at the faces of people who had lived their lives with a hole in their history. People who had once believed Claire Beckett was just another girl who ran away. She wasn't just a name in an old report, Maya said. She wasn't just a missing girl. Claire was my great aunt. She was 17 years old. She loved music. She dreamed of living in a city where she could play piano in the evenings and drink coffee in the mornings. She was kind. She was strong. And she never should have been forgotten. She paused, the breeze tugging lightly at the edge of her coat. She didn't get justice right away. She didn't get remembered like she should have. But she got found. And not by accident. She was brought home by a dog who wouldn't stop barking. A dog who knew something wasn't right. Diesel brought her back to us when no one else could. The crowd was silent. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Maya looked down at her partner, her hand resting on his head. Diesel's eyes were locked on the casket, unmoving, his head slightly bowed as if in respect. She mattered, Maya said. And now, finally, the world knows it. The service ended with soft music and long embraces. Dirt fell gently over the casket as people took turns dropping flowers into the grave. When it was Maya's turn, she bent down and placed one of the old photographs in the earth beside the lilies. Then she whispered, "You're not forgotten, Claire. Not anymore." Diesel stood as they turned to leave, his paws silent on the grass. He gave one last look toward the grave, then followed Maya down the hill. The past had spoken, and it had been heard. The old schoolhouse hadn't seen students in decades. Its windows were boarded up, the paint peeled from the wood siding, and vines climbed lazily up the sides. But the town hadn't let it fall completely. They kept the grounds tidy, the path clear, the bell tower untouched. It had become a piece of history, quiet, still, waiting. Now, something new stood on the front lawn. A bronze statue, gleaming beneath the afternoon sun, captured the heart of a story no one would ever forget. It was Diesel, carved with care, sitting tall but calm, one paw resting gently on a closed trunk. The detail was striking, the shape of his ears, the curve of his muzzle, even the slight bend in his tail, just as he always sat beside Maya. The trunk beneath his paw wasn't just a box. It was the secret he had unearthed, the silence he had shattered. The townspeople had gathered again, this time not for mourning, but for memory. There were fewer tears and more quiet smiles, nods of respect, soft conversations held in the corners of the schoolyard. Children stood hand in hand with their parents. Older folks stood with canes or walkers, gazing at the statue like it was a window into something long buried. At the base of the bronze sculpture, a simple plaque had been placed. No long story, no dramatic words, just one line that said everything. To the one who heard what no one else would. Maya stood close to the statue, her hand resting gently on Diesel's back. He sat beside her, older now, a little slower than before, but proud and peaceful. His tail gave one soft thump against the grass. He didn't understand the statue, or the crowd, or the cameras that clicked around them, but he understood Maya's presence. He understood her hand on his side. And he understood that this moment was quiet in a different way. Not a silence filled with secrets, but one filled with peace. After the mayor gave a short speech and the ribbon was cut, people slowly began to leave. Some lingered, taking pictures. Others left flowers at the base of the statue. White lilies for Claire, yellow roses for Hope. The crowd thinned, and soon it was just Maya and Diesel again. She knelt beside him, brushing her fingers through the fur at his neck. He leaned into her hand, eyes soft and blinking. "You didn't just find the truth," she whispered. "You freed it." Her voice caught in her throat, but she kept speaking. "You brought her back. You made people listen. You made them see what they refused to for so long." Diesel looked up at her with eyes full of understanding, and then turned his gaze to the statue, as if to say, "It's not about me. It never was." But Maya knew better. Without him, Claire would still be buried beneath concrete and silence. Without him, the truth would still be chained behind a closet door. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the schoolyard. Maya stood, and Diesel rose beside her. They walked the gravel path together, their steps steady and quiet. Behind them, the statue stood watch, not over a grave, not over a mystery, but over a truth that finally had a voice. And the dog who gave it back. If this story moved you like it did us, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. Stories like Diesel's remind us that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths.